I am an English Queen's Counsel, and as has been said, I was the first president of the court in Sierra Leone, which is currently about to issue its verdict on Charles Taylor for war crimes. So I published this report, which is available, into the massacre of the Mujahideen prisoners in 1988 by the direction of persons who, many of whom are in high position or even higher position in Iran today. I regard these prison massacres as one of the single great crimes of the 20th century, perhaps one of the great crimes that is unknown. It is certainly on a par, equal to in barbarity, with the death marches of the Japanese prisoners of war at the end of the Second World War. It is worse in a way than Srebrenica, where 7,000 Muslim men and boys were killed. It is worse because the thousands of young people who were killed in the 1988 prison massacres without proper trial were, in many cases, prisoners who had served their sentence, prisoners who'd been arrested 7 or 8 years earlier for demonstrating against the Ayatollah. So that, of course, they were the ancestors, if you like, the Mujahideen, of those who are at present in Camp Ashraf. And there is no doubt that the attitude of the Iranian regime, represented by the blood-curdling, murderous, insulting demands of Rafsanjani, of Khomeini, now the supreme leader of that country, Ali Khomeini, who was, of course, then a deputy. These men still, as I say, in high position, hate and want to kill the Mujahideen because of their, essentially, their religious beliefs deviate from those that have been imposed by the Republic, by the Revolutionary Republic of Iran. So there can be no doubt that whatever the background, whatever the conflict, and there is no doubt, let's face it, that the Mujahideen had used armed attacks until 2001. They were an armed opposite force to the Iranian regime, and let there be no doubt about that. They are a legitimate political organization, and it is clear that we in Britain, our courts, have decided that they cannot be classed as a terrorist organization. The European Union refuses to class them as a terrorist organization. It's one of the great ironies of this case that the United States, despite it having been ruled that the original designation as a terrorist organization was taken without due process, have not got round to reclassifying them. And it is this failure, this extraordinary, ironic failure, that the government of Iran now uses to put pressure on the Iraqis, pressure to which they have succumbed willingly, to extirpate the residents of Camp Ashraf. Now, let me say, as an international lawyer, that this they cannot do under international law. International law prohibits what is called the refoulement, the return to a country where you will be persecuted, of refugees. There is no doubt that prevents the government of Iraq clearing this camp and deporting its residents to Iran. If that were ever done, those residents would be in danger of death, the kind of death that was meted out without trial, without decency, without mercy to the prisoners in 1988. They would be vulnerable to torture and to persecution. So that is out. But the government of Iraq itself has a terrible track record in relation to Camp Ashraf, when the American forces, who had dealt fairly and properly and decently with the residents, who had decommissioned their weapons and given them, declared them protected persons in 2004. That's a very important fact in this case, that the American forces officially declared them protected persons in 2004. When the Americans started to withdraw, the Iraqi government began to unleash real violence upon the residents of Camp Ashraf, beginning in 2009, where they made a number of armed attacks on the camp. They killed 9 people and they injured many more. And they said that they would start an inquiry, but they've never done so. We've never heard of it. And then, of course, more recently, as you know, the quite brutal, unexplained, unjustified attack on Camp Ashraf that left 37 people, 8 of them women, dead. That was a monstrous event, condemned around the world. Do you think Maleki has done anything to explain it? Do you think that the Iraqis have followed international law and conducted an inquiry? They say they are inquiring, but they're liars. Maleki is a liar, because he has disobeyed international law and is now killing, at the behest, one suspects, of the Iranians, people who have a protected status, who are, on any view, refugees. So that is really the situation in which we are in. We have refugees, 3,400 of them, in a country which is determined to get rid of them by hook or by crook, which has killed now almost 50 of them in cold blood, state killings. And this, a government that owes its existence to the West. It would still be ruled by Saddam Hussein, would Iraq, if the West, America and Britain, arguably wrongly, but nonetheless it's a fact, had not supplanted Saddam Hussein and exchanged his brutal regime. This is truly an appalling situation, because Maleki has given a date, 31st of December, coinciding suspiciously with the date of the final American withdrawal. It must be remembered that back in 1986, when this group fled from France because France expelled them because of Iranian pressure, it was France, really, that gave in first to Iranian pressure in 1986 and forced them to come to Iraq, where, of course, they were welcomed by Saddam Hussein. They were given refugee status by him, quite rightly, by his regime. They were given Camp Ashraf, a deserted place, and they spent millions of dollars refurbishing it, building roads, building schools, building library facilities. All these they have, and they are entitled to compensation if, and I don't dispute, and it's something that, let's be read, I don't know how my colleagues see it, but I see the international law very clearly. Although they have been given that land, and for 25 years they have built structures upon it, and they must have compensation for it. At the moment, that seems to be an great demand, because what they're fearing for is their lives, and what the international community, if the responsibility to protect has any meaning, this is a classic case for exercising it. The UN has signed up to the principle of a responsibility to protect innocent civilians who are at risk. Here we have refugees, protected people, who are plainly at risk of their life. What is to be done? I think that the United States bears a heavy burden because it created the legitimate expectation when it declared everyone a protected person. It has created that legitimate expectation, and it must honor it. So that is the first thing. The second thing, the United Nations is deeply involved. It is obliged, in my view, to ensure that its responsibility to protect principle is taken. I wrote a legal opinion, I hope, which is available today, and I conclude as a matter of law that the UN has a responsibility to protect the PMOI because they are refugees. Their leaders and initial contingent came to Iraq because they were expelled from France in 1986. They cannot, under international law, be returned to Iran, and the High Commissioner for Refugees has a responsibility to secure their basic human rights, including the right to decent living conditions. So that is the situation that I believe obtains in international law. There is a United Nations force in Iraq, and that is, of course, UNAMI. So United Nations must put its troops, its blue berets, in the vicinity of the camp to make it a safe haven until this emergency has been solved. In the meantime, the UNHCR must process the 3,400 people. Now, here we have a most bizarre bureaucratic approach by the UNHCR, which, for all the great work that organization does, I confess to find extraordinary and bureaucratic and dangerous and wrong. They say, we've got to interview everyone individually outside Camp Ashraf. Well, the minute you take people outside Camp Ashraf, they are vulnerable. That has been clear from what has gone on in the last couple of years. It is stupid for the UNHCR to make this condition. We all know that these people, all 3,400 of them, are genuine refugees. The whole history cries out that they are genuine refugees. And the UNHCR, by adopting this foolish, pettifogging, bureaucratic approach of wanting to interview every single person outside Camp Ashraf, it should conduct the interviews in the next 4 weeks in the camp and provide, as is obvious, a certification that all of them are in fact genuine refugees. And then it is for European countries, France in particular, because France wrongly, in my view, succumbed to Iranian pressure in 2000, all those years ago, in 1986, to extirpate them, and that is why they went to Iraq in the first place. So the duty is very much on France and other European countries, and I would call on Baroness Ashton, who is, I know, concerned about this matter and concerned for human rights, to use her good offices to ensure that, with a little help from the UNHCR, which needs to be less bureaucratic and more realistic, to ensure that this impending emergency should be solved as soon as possible. Thank you.